Hey guys, this is God of Politics. Welcome to a brand new video, but before we get started with this video, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Also follow me on Twitter and join the Discord. Those are both linked down in the description. But in today's video, I'm going to be doing a 2024 election prediction between Joe Biden and Ron DeSantis. Now, there's been a lot of talk that Ron DeSantis may run for president in 2024. He hasn't ruled it out when asked about it, and there already have been feuds between him and Joe Biden, Ron DeSantis being the current governor of Florida, formerly a congressman in the state of Florida. So there's been a lot of speculation amongst people that he may run for president in 2024. But what would a map look like if he does face off against Joe Biden? Now, there's a lot of questions on whether Joe Biden may run in 2024. There's a lot of questions on whether Ron DeSantis may run in 2024. But I am doing this hypothetical election prediction and predicting what the map may look like. I put Ted Cruz as the VP candidate for the Republican Party because I think that Ron DeSantis would choose someone that's ideologically similar to them on most issues. But let's get right into this prediction. So to start, let's do the safe states for the Republican Party. That includes Montana, Idaho, North Dakota, South Dakota, Wyoming, all of Nebraska except for the 2nd District, Kansas, Utah, Oklahoma, Missouri, Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Tennessee, Kentucky, Indiana, West Virginia, and South Carolina. So that adds up to 121 safe electoral votes for Ron DeSantis and Ted Cruz. And then for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, they would win California, Oregon, Washington, Colorado, Illinois, New York, Vermont, Maine's 1st District, Maine at large as well, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Connecticut, New Jersey, Delaware, Maryland, D.C., and finally the state of Virginia. So Joe Biden and Kamala Harris have already gotten up to 201 electoral votes, whereas Ron DeSantis and Ted Cruz are all the way down at just 121 electoral votes. But they will gain a couple of states based off of the likely margins. Actually, I also need to add Hawaii to that list. So that's 205 electoral votes for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. And then for the likely margin states, I do believe that Iowa would go by likely margin. Iowa is a state where the rural areas have become just so Republican and are trending Republican that it's going to be very difficult for it to be much closer for the Democratic Party. Similar story in Ohio, where there's a lot of room to gain for Republicans in areas like Eastern Ohio, which trended very Republican in the 2020 election. And I think that the combination of those rural areas having such a large influence in the state is going to be to the detriment of the Democratic Party. And I do think that Ron DeSantis would win those states both by a likely margin. I also think Alaska would go by a likely margin. It was a likely margin, or close to a likely margin, very close in 2020. Joe Biden lost it by just above 10 percentage points. I think that you could see a similar result to that in 2020, where he loses it by just under 10 percentage points. You know, the Anchorage suburbs actually, it's kind of weird to call it suburbs, but the Anchorage area has trended towards Joe Biden in this election. It is much bluer than it used to be. It went by, more than 20 points back in 2004 and 2008. Of course, Sarah Palin was from there, but it has trended blue ever since that election. I do believe that Joe Biden would perform slightly better here as well. As for the likely margin states for the Democrats, actually, Maine's 2nd District, I should add, for the Democratic Party. So that's 148 electoral votes for them after the likely margin states. And then for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, I do believe they'd win New Mexico by likely margin. Sure, Joe Biden might be hurt a little bit by the oil things, but, he's still giving out oil permits. He only did the delay for like 100 days or something of new oil permits, but he has issued some anyway. And, New Mexico, many people knew about Joe Biden's policies regardless. So people that care about a lot of those policies hurting them were voters that were most likely Republican anyway. But I do concede that it may hurt him a little bit and push it down to a likely margin. But I do think that Joe Biden in this election would do better with Latino voters. I think they do have a thing for incumbents, and I think Joe Biden would thus, of course, make a lot of outreach to them that he didn't make in this election or the 2020 election. I do think that he would perform slightly better with Latinos because of it. I also believe that Minnesota would go by a likely margin. Donald Trump was really the best candidate the Republicans have had for the rural areas in decades, if not ever, really. And I think it's going to be hard for Ron DeSantis to match that, at least the turnout, I should say, because, turnout and margins both matter, but turnout's going to be a problem as well because, you can get similar margins, but if you don't get the turnout, it's going to be a problem. And that's the area where Republicans get the most votes. And sure, Ron DeSantis might do slightly better in the Minneapolis suburbs with more white voters, but if you're not getting the same kind of rural talent, you're not going to really net very much. And so if Donald Trump couldn't do it, I think it's going to be difficult for Ron DeSantis to be able to do it. I think Joe Biden would win it by a similar amount, 220 2020 as well. New Hampshire is another state I think would go by a likely margin. New Hampshire is a state where, of course, many people said that it would be close because Joe Biden didn't do well in the primary there. He ended up doing very well, doing well in these small towns, doing well in the Manchester area, the Concord area, and he did very well, and he won the state by around 7 percentage points, more than what Barack Obama won it by in 2012. I do think that he'd get a similar result this time as well. New Hampshire is a state that I do think he would be quite popular in, and I do think that he would be able to win it by a likely margin. Same thing with Nebraska's 2nd district. I could put this in a lean margin just because we don't know how the redistricting is going to change Nebraska's 2nd district. I think it might become slightly redder. But I think regardless, the Nebraska 2nd district is a district that Joe Biden has a pretty strong footing in, and I do believe that in this scenario, he would win it by a likely margin. Now, getting to the lean margin states, the states that Ron DeSantis and Ted Cruz would win by a lean margin. First of all is Florida. Now, many of you say, oh, it would be a likely margin to be, maybe in a safe margin. But, Ron DeSantis is about a 54% approval rating. Same thing as, about the same as Rick Scott, who won by 1 percentage points in a 2014 election, which was an R+6 electorate. Ron DeSantis has similar approval to Rick Scott, and at the presidential level, it is quite different. Usually the home state advantage isn't that much, especially in a state as inelastic as Florida. Florida trended 2 points Republican in the 2020 election. Sure, Ron DeSantis could do better in, a lot of the coastal areas, maybe in Miami-Dade County, but I don't think he'd win it by more than 5 percentage points, but he would certainly win it. Texas is another state I think would go by a lean margin. Ted Cruz wouldn't really help with the strong and heavy Latino areas down along the Rio Grande Valley, down along, the border counties. And I do think that there'd be, again, a lot of struggles in the suburbs, areas that are not only having voters shifting towards the Democratic Party, but growing areas with demographic changes that are helping the Democratic Party. And I don't see Ron DeSantis and Ted Cruz doing much better with minority voters than what Donald Trump did in 2020. I think Joe Biden can make significant outreach to them that he didn't make in 2016, as I pointed out before. And I do think that Texas would trend a couple points Democrat, probably going by around 3 percentage points, but it won't go blue at this point. Maybe 2028, but we'll just have to see. And those are the lean margin states for the Republicans, taking them up to 220 electoral votes. For the Democrats, I do think that they'd win Nevada by a lean margin. Nevada is a pretty stubborn state for the Democrats. Well, they keep winning it. Historically, they've been winning it for a while, a decade or so, a little bit longer than that, actually. And they've had Democratic senators, Democratic governors. They have 2 Democratic senators, a Democratic governor, a supermajority almost in the state legislature. So they're doing very well. But Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, I didn't think, can maintain his margins in the suburbs while performing a little bit better with Latino voters. And I think they would give him a victory margin of around 4 percentage points. Michigan's another state I do think he would win by a lean margin. Michigan's a state that is historically more Democratic than, a lot of these other Rust Belt states, especially states like Wisconsin, Ohio, Indiana, of course. And so I do think that, it's losing electoral vote, of course. I do think that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris would win the state by a lean margin. I do think that Joe Biden racks up such huge numbers in a lot of these small towns, Grand Rapids, Lansing, Detroit, areas like Macomb County, even areas up in like Marquette. Joe Biden nets votes there as well. And I do think that he would continue to net votes there while not doing much worse in the rural areas, maybe not doing worse at all. I also think that Georgia would go by a lean margin. Now, this is because of the huge turnout operation that Democrats do have. Not only do you have hundreds of thousands of people that are going to be moving to Georgia by this time, hundreds of thousands of additional people after the 900,000 that have moved this decade, or close to 1 million, you're also going to have, the suburbs, and the suburbs are giving big margins to the Democrats. And even if you do see some reversion, if Ron DeSantis does do better in the suburbs, which is not out of the question, I think that is probably quite an easy scenario to see. But even with that, there's a lot of minority voters, and there's going to be a lot more minority voters in 2024. And with that turn operation by Stacey Abrams to get those voters out who may be governor at this point, it's going to be difficult to beat Democrats in the state of Georgia, which is becoming increasingly Democrat as we speak. Pennsylvania is another state which I think, actually, I'll leave it at a tilt margin for now, but, all these states are actually going to be tilt margins for the Democrats regardless, so I can just fill that in already. Pennsylvania, I think Joe Biden can get good enough margins in the suburbs suburbs to compensate for the rural areas, which not only are losing population, but probably won't have as high turnout without Trump on the ticket. The margins may not be as good. You know, you might have a Democratic senator, 2 Democratic senators, and a Democratic governor here if John Fetterman wins. And overall, it's a state that has historically been quite Democratic, and I think that Joe Biden would be able to win it again, probably around a similar margin to what he won it by in 2020, but he would be able to win it regardless. Same thing with Wisconsin. I think that he might do a little bit better in the WOW counties. You know, if you look at Donald Trump, he did historically bad here for a Republican, but he would do slightly better in, a lot of the areas that he struggled in this election, just due to the fact that Trump not being on the ticket would hurt turnout and thus net more votes for Joe Biden. But overall, I think he would win Wisconsin very, very narrowly, but I think he would win it. Arizona is another state where I think that slightly doing better with Latino voters would help him, as well as maintaining most of his margins in the suburbs, and with its gaining population of, a lot of minority voters, I think that would help Joe Biden as well. And then finally, the state of North Carolina. This would be the only flip that we're seeing, is the state of North Carolina. This is a state that if Joe Biden, maybe had higher black turnout, maybe stopped the bleeding in the rural areas, he could have won this state. And this is a very iffy state because you've got conflicting trends. You've got rural areas that there's a lot of room to gain for Republicans, unlike states like Georgia, unlike states like, a lot of these other southern states. But North Carolina, there is room to gain for Republicans in the rural areas. And I do think that they would do that. But, the population growth you're seeing in this research triangle is making a huge difference for the overall, population. When you account for the national environment, North Carolina is trying to blow every election since 2004, and that is going to make a difference. And I do think that this would be finally the election that it flips after first flipping in decades in 2008. But overall, this is the map. 318 electoral votes for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, 220 electoral votes for Ron DeSantis and Ted Cruz. Joe Biden would be reelected as president with 12 more electoral votes than what he got in 2016. This would be a pretty resounding victory for him, beating the governor Ron DeSantis. So thank you all for watching this video. Please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Also follow me on Twitter and join the Discord. Those are both linked down in the description. But thank you all for watching, guys, and I will see you guys later.